More protests and uprisings are expected in Minnesota and across the country this weekend over the death of George Floyd. The 46-year-old died on Memorial Day after a Minneapolis police officer pressed his knee into his neck for more than 8 minutes. The incident was captured on video. It has led to days of demonstrations in cities nationwide. Some have turned violent as people demand justice and accountability in Floyd's death. 4 officers involved in the case were immediately fired from the department. One is now facing criminal charges. I want to bring in Jamila Hodge. She's the director of the Reshaping Prosecution Program at the Vera Institute of Justice. She also worked for more than a decade as an assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., handling both federal and local cases. Jami, Derek Chauvin, the officer who pressed his knee into Floyd's neck, was arrested and charged with murder and manslaughter on Friday. That's 4 days after the initial incident. Why the delay in arresting officers in situations like these?
So it really, what the Hennepin County attorney shared is this is actually the fastest that they have moved in a case like this before. When we see arrests happen on the street, when we see the crime happen on the street, it's usually the police officers who are making the arrest. And so it gets complicated, you can imagine, when it's the police officers who are conducting the crime. And while this arrest has happened, what I'd really like to talk about is the fact that this arrest, and even if there's a conviction and the county attorney is already talking about additional charges, that is not enough for justice and what we're seeing happen in this country. And while we need to hold police officers accountable, unfortunately, we know that does not solve the systemic issues that keep leading to the death of unarmed Black men and women in this country. And so we're going to have to do something more than just the individual accountability of the officers in cases like George Floyd.
That's right. As you mentioned, this is a systemic problem that is not just located in Minneapolis. Protests against Floyd's death have been happening all across the country. Demonstrations in Atlanta, Houston, Los Angeles, New York, and dozens of other cities. What about this particular case, or is it just the timing, do you think, that has sparked such outrage with Americans of every color?
I mean, I think that people know these incidents happen more than we brings to the public, more than we see on the news, and that it's when we have an incident so clearly captured on cell phone video, when we see very clearly that this was an 8-minute time period, a very long time period that this officer persisted in this action that killed George Floyd. I think that's part of why the outrage and the unrest that we see now is sparked. But again, I actually think it's because this is unfortunately a long line of what we've been seeing happen in this country. We had Breonna Taylor's unfortunate death in Louisville, Kentucky. We just a few weeks ago finally saw movement after the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, and the list goes on. And people are tired. They are tired of seeing Black men and women killed for very minor infractions, and which is again why I think it's so important that we have to talk about the system that allows law enforcement to continue to interact with Black men and women in this way over such minor things. That we are criminalizing poverty, we are criminalizing public health issues like substance use disorder and mental health issues, and it is that over-criminalization that continues to lead to these interactions and to these deaths. And until we address this problem at a systemic level, unfortunately, we're going to continue to see these deaths happen. And so people are tired. They are ready for change.
I think it's probably worth mentioning as you're making the point that this is a minor infraction, that George Floyd was being accused of forgery at the moment that the police officers took him into custody. Floyd's death has also been compared to that of Eric Garner, who died during a confrontation with police in New York City. That was almost 6 years ago. He also said the words, "I can't breathe," as officers held him in a chokehold. What are some of the other similarities and differences between these cases?
I mean, you are naming those exact similarities, and I think that is not lost on people. If Eric Garner's life was taken and there were protests and there were calls for change, and people will look at police policies, they'll look at enforcement policies, and sometimes we see changes in those policies, but clearly that's not enough. And so here we have again a Black man who really it was a $20 bill that was something very minor that was passed. A Black man who, like so many people in this country, in response to all of the stay-at-home orders for COVID-19, lost his job. And so you can imagine what may have led to the decision to pass a bill, but that can cause loss of life, that can lead to even just the way the police interacted with him that could lead to death, shows the lack of humanity, the lack of justice that Black people face from this system, from our system as a whole every day. So these similarities are not lost, but it also lets us know that the way we have been trying to address these issues is not enough, that the incident by incident approach is not working, and that it's time to do something broader, and that we really truly need to evaluate the system as a whole and how we need to change how we approach and have law enforcement interacting with our men and women that lead to these unfortunate encounters.
And Jamila, as you say, a systematic approach is necessary, and we've been dealing with these issues in the United States for a very long time, the entire history of the country. I recall that there have been efforts to make systematic change following some of these other high-profile incidences, that there has been body cameras in police departments, there has been additional police training, sensitivity training, racial bias understanding training. None of these seem to have made much of a difference, it seems, at least in the mind of many of these protesters and on people watching this story play out, it seems, on repeat. So what types of systematic changes do you think are necessary to actually make a difference?
No, that we need to radically change our system. We in this country, the U.S. incarcerates more than any other place on the planet. We have under 5% of the world's population, but nearly 25% of the world's incarcerated population. Our system is significantly too big and must be shrunk, and that's going to require radical change. And some of the work that I do is with prosecutors on how we keep the things out of the system that never should be there in the first place. So much of what cycles through our jails and prisons, and we have 2.2 million people who cycle through our jails and prisons on any given day. So much of that are crimes that have nothing to do with truly presenting a danger to someone or a danger to a community. So much of that are things that have allowed our system to become a backfill for underfunded systems like our healthcare system, like our education system. So we need to radically change what we consider crime in this country. We need to educate ourselves on how our system was even founded. If we truly understood that the founding of our criminal legal system was as a means to exhibit control of those who were formerly enslaved, and if we really go back and learn our history, then it will require something very different of us in trying to respond. It will require us to do more than just tinker around the edges. And while I think things like body-worn camera and having training and really revising policies, they're important. It's because of camera footage that we are able to more readily hold police officers accountable, but that is not enough. We need to make wholesale changes across the system and really reckon with a history that we've never reckoned with in this country.
I want to ask you one more question on the specifics of this case. Can you tell us more about the next steps in the investigation? I'm wondering what's the likelihood that the other 3 officers involved will be arrested and charged as well, and if those decisions will make any impact on how protesters are responding.
No, I think we know from Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman and his most recent press conferences that we do expect to see additional charges with those 3 other officers who are involved. They're clearly captured on video. There was some recent footage released that showed that it was more than just former Officer Chauvin who was pinning George Floyd down. So I believe those charges are coming. I believe with this very clear evidence captured on video camera, that we'll see convictions. But unfortunately, I don't believe that's enough. I think that we have seen time over time, we're seeing arrests, we're seeing convictions, but that does not stop this from happening. And I think protesters and those who are standing out and making their voices heard know that this system doesn't offer enough of a response, that we actually need to look at the system itself, which not only allows this to happen, but enables and really promotes the killing of Black men. And until we change the system, these individual cases, and even when we get the convictions, get resolutions, that solution will not be enough.
Jamila Hodge, thank you.